You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello, everyone. You are listening to We Saw the Devil. This is Robin, and I am here with an episode that I initially did not plan on putting out, and that is the OceanGate Submersible incident that transpired over the last week. Absolutely crazy. But much like most of you, probably, I'm a news junkie. I followed it minute by minute, more or less. Also, though, I had a couple of social observations that I wanted to touch on. So clearly, that meant that I had to do a full episode on it. And I don't even have an intro for it because if you have been online in any capacities, especially social media, you have, without fail, seen a meme or people laughing about it or whatever. And I feel like there's a little more here that needs to be unpacked. So that's what we're going to be doing in this episode. Before we get into it, let's just get the housekeeping out of the way. You already know the drill. The website is WeSawTheDevil.com. From there, you can find the Patreon, all social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And if you want to email, if you have a question, concern, compliment, anything like that, you can do so at info@WeSawTheDevil.com. And if you're liking the content, please take 20 seconds out of your day to leave that 5-star review on iTunes because it means the absolute world, but also as well for sponsors, administrative stuff like that too. If you like the show, please show that by leaving a 5-star review. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into it. I wanted to initially do a really quick response to this entire ordeal because, yeah, it was a fascinating and ultimately tragic blip on the weekly newsreel, right? I mean, did you ever foresee CNN having a live oxygen level countdown on their screen? That was just absolutely wild to see. It was midday last Monday that the Coast Guard first tweeted that it was searching for the Titan Submersible, which was a 22-foot-long Titanic touring vessel that was carrying 4 tourists and a pilot. And for those of you who, don't exist on social media or the news or haven't kept up with it, that submersible lost communication with the control ship less than 2 hours into its dive last Sunday. And this actually transpired about 900 miles off the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The submersible was operated by a company called OceanGate, with its own CEO, a man by the name of Stockton Rush, manning the craft. And OceanGate advertises the trip officially as a chance to, quote, become one of the few to see the Titanic with your own eyes. Securing a seat on this vessel is $250,000 per ticket. And the company, OceanGate, actually tried to advertise this as this isn't just mere tourism, but you're diving with a scientific purpose. If you've been a longtime listener, you've probably heard me mention and discuss this on previous episodes, but I've been a certified scuba diver since I was 15 years old. I went on to get advanced certifications. I've been obsessed with the ocean since I saw Jaws at 8 years old for the first time. I mean, I thought that I was going to be a marine biologist from the time I was a small child up until like 15. Unfortunately, obviously, it wasn't in the cards for me. But I bring this up because I've actually done a dive at a shipwreck myself. I've been through a lot of the trainings and stuff and have base knowledge that is relevant to this particular event. When I was 23 years old, I did the USS Oriskany, which is about 20 miles south off the coast of Pensacola. It's the largest artificial reef in the world, and it's basically a U.S. warship that was intentionally sunk off the coast with the sole purpose of creating a man-made reef. If I were to die tomorrow and I had to look back on my life and the highlight reels were starting to play, this would probably be my number one experience because words cannot express how beautiful and otherworldly it is. A fun fact, my largest tattoo that I have is actually of a very large sea turtle on my right leg, and I got it explicitly because of the Oriskany dive, because a loggerhead turtle was actually kind of following me around and I felt like Snow White. Like, it's just otherworldly. And none of that is really relevant other than just saying, I understand the thrill of being deep underwater, knowing that you're exploring something that the vast majority of your fellow humans, friends and family, will never see with their own eyes. And the Titanic is basically the underwater holy grail of this. Not only do you have a historical mass casualty event, you have a Hollywood blockbuster film that further cemented its importance and intrigue into our culture. Other holy grails for some, it might not be the Titanic, it might be Mount Everest. Imagine we came up with a technology to allow helicopters or other small specialized aircraft to take people directly from the Everest base camp in Nepal right to the top of Mount Everest for $250,000. Would you go? I mean, I know it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison, but still. I used to be a total adrenaline junkie myself, so I absolutely get it. But sometimes our desire to explore doesn't necessarily align with physics or physiology. And in the case of this, the OceanGate, the Titanic is more than 12,000 feet down on the bottom of the ocean floor. That's 2.5 miles down, y'all. The human body just simply can't handle the pressure. At almost 1,100 feet down, your rib cage would explode and start to crack if you tried to dive it due to the pressure. 12,000 feet down absolutely requires a very specialized craft to create a safe and pressurized environment that would allow a human being to travel to that depth. And that's where OceanGate's Titan comes into play in all of this. And I'm not going to go over or into the full construction of the Titan, with its carbon fiber hull, 8-inch plexiglass window, the overall design, and then not to mention everyone's favorite, the fact that a $40 shitty video game controller was used to control the movements from within the vessel. I mean, even though all of those things came under scrutiny from employees, friends, industry experts, and even potential customers, let's just say that the OceanGate Titan was a janky fucking attempt at a deep ocean submersible. More than just a couple corners were cut. Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate, was very, very, very vocal about hating safety regulations. There are multiple video and text interviews where he talks about safety being the killer of adventure, exploration, and innovation. And it's also well documented that OceanGate employees who pushed back or questioned the safety of the vessel were summarily fired. And there's also evidence of hush money and out-of-court settlements to back that up as well. And I think for a lot of people, it's just the sheer irony of this entire situation. The Titanic itself had already received multiple iceberg warnings before it even departed Southampton's White Star Dock back in 1912. Unfortunately, no one heeded those warnings or took appropriate action later when they actually approached the ice field the night of hitting the iceberg. Stockton Rush didn't heed any warnings from industry experts, even after it was made known that the Titan could not be certified for depths required to reach the Titanic safely. He knew that his craft that he was taking down, paying customers 12,000 feet down, and that the craft that he built, he was the CEO of the company, that it was not safe enough to do so. Even the 8-inch thick plexiglass window that was used for the portal, because if you've seen pictures of the submersible, you know that it's so big, but there's only one window outside. There's one porthole that looks outside, and it was only 8-inch thick plexiglass. That wasn't even certified for more than 2,000 feet of pressure down. 2,000 feet down under the surface is all that level was, that plexiglass porthole was certified for safely. He was taking it 12,000 feet down. 12,000, more than 6 times down beyond what it was certified safe for. So first of all, let's talk about who was on the vessel itself. We're going to start with Hamish Harding. He was the chairman of Action Aviation, an aviation sales and consulting company. Per their website, they sell aircraft to Fortune 100 companies, international corporations, heads of state, and people in the entertainment and sports industries. Now, Hamish Harding is very, 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 very well known in Britain. He broke the Guinness World Record for the fastest flight around both of the Earth's poles in 2019. He's also broken Guinness World Records for the longest duration at a full ocean depth by a crewed vessel, also the longest distance traveled along the deepest part of the ocean. He was also one of 6 people If you watch Jeff Bezos do the Blue Origins mission last June when they flew to the edge of space, he was also one of the men on that vessel at that time. Then we have Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman Dawood. Shahzada was 48, was the vice chairman of Dawood Hercules, an investment and holding company based in Karachi, Pakistan. And that business is actually part of his family business, and it's been around for more than 100 years. Shahzada is actually the heir to one of Pakistan's largest family fortunes, worth tens of billions of dollars. Sadly, he was joined by his 19-year-old son, Suleiman, and I find this piece here to be the most heartbreaking part. And this is where my personal empathy for the situation kicks in. Suleiman was 19 years old, and he didn't even want to go on this trip to begin with. He was apparently terrified of the ocean, did not have any interest, did not want to go, and he declined when his father originally asked him. So how did he end up there? He wanted to give his dad a good Father's Day. And he knew that his father was going, and it was going to be the dive on Father's Day. And so he put his personal fears aside to join his father because he wanted to make his father happy by going on this trip with him. And he was so terrified that, per his aunt, an interview that was done with Suleiman's aunt, he actually called her from basically the parking lot before they actually even got on because he was so scared and didn't want to do it. Then we have Paul-Henri Nargliot, and he was the director of underwater research for the RMS Titanic, an American company that owns the salvage rights to the wreck and operates exhibits featuring artifacts from the ship. More or less, he was the Titanic expert of the group. I mean, he really, really, really knew his stuff. He was one of the world leaders and experts on the Titanic. And that is what OceanGate advertises, right? Is that we're going to take you down. We're basically going to take you down to tour the Titanic, and we're going to have a Titanic expert on board to give you more or less a narration and lesson on this. And that brings us finally to Stockton Rush. If you really want to hear about his life, he earned a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from Princeton, MBA from Berkeley School of Business. And then in 2009, he founded OceanGate, where he oversaw the company's financial and engineering strategies. What people know about Stockton Rush is that he cut corners. He came out and said that he didn't want to hire any older white men because they are not the key to innovation. So he started hiring younger people right out of college, people with no industry experience, to get their thoughts and opinions on builds and things like that. When friends or colleagues reached out to him and told him, hey, we don't feel like this is what you're doing is safe. We think you're cutting corners. Stockton Rush actually did say that I believe that the Titan is basically invulnerable, that I think that we have a good team, we have a good build, and it's offensive to me that you think that I'm going to kill someone one day, because many people associated or who knew Stockton Rush told him directly, you're going to kill someone someday. And he pretty much responded like, oh, shucks, not me. That's offensive. And then here we are. And here's something that grinds my gears really, really, really badly. Wealthy people like Stockton Rush, explorers, adventurers, whatever, on the surface to the public, they act like they are doing this as like their gift to humanity. This is our gift to research. We're trying to learn something. We're trying to be respectful and push gears and innovate. It has actually come out publicly since this entire debacle that he was actually trying to source and get information on the bottom of the ocean for oil and gas companies. Basically, is there any oil in that area and how he can monetize it? So he wasn't doing this in the interest of exploration or preserving and respecting the Titanic. He was doing this in order to get a huge payout from oil companies, potentially. But I digress. So what exactly happened overall? Because I see a lot of people still not quite understanding exactly what happened or how they died. I see some people believing that they really somehow are outside of their vessel and drowned. So we're going to talk about what exactly transpired in this accident. So last Sunday, about an hour and a half after the submersible dipped below the surface, the Titan lost communication with the surface. They had scheduled check-ins every 15 minutes as they descended the 12,000 feet, and they went completely silent. It took 8 full hours until it was reported missing. Now, what you also have to understand, I think, to understand how they died is that, and I'm going to give you all a little bit of a diving lesson here, same one that I pretty much got myself. As divers descend into the ocean, the external pressure on their bodies increases by about 1 atmosphere every 10 or so meters. To balance that out, it is necessary to increase the pressure of the air that they breathe from tanks or pumped down into them from the surface so that their chests and lungs do not collapse. With higher pressure going against your lungs, gases like nitrogen, helium, and oxygen become increasingly soluble in the blood. Oxygen is metabolized, but nitrogen and helium build up through the body. So what happens is, as a diver, when you go down, you do your thing, you tickle seahorses, whatever. But when you're ready to go back up, you have to be very, very, very careful that you do not come up to the surface too quickly, because you may get what you may have heard as the bends. And the bends happens when pressure suddenly drops. So like, let's say that you're underwater, something happens and you go up too quickly. Nitrogen gas inside your body starts to expand and then develops into little bubbles. And then those little bubbles become trapped in your joints, and it can cause severe pain and even death. So a diver with severe decompression sickness is actually treated using hyperbaric oxygen therapy inside a recompression chamber. And when you're a diver, you get certified for different depths. So it's not like you can go to a 3-4 day course, go on your couple dives, and then you're totally certified to do any depth and any level. There are different types of certifications that you can get, and each one gives you certain limits. Now, I have my advanced open water dive certification, so I can go down typically about 100 feet. Now, just for some extra context here, the world's deepest dive, like the world record for the deepest dive, was undertaken by Amin Gabor in the Red Sea in September of 2014. He dove down 1,090 feet. Definitely do not try that at home, folks. If you recall, 1,100 is when the pressure's so great that your rib cage will just fucking crack. But I think this is a really good example in terms of depressurization. So Amin Gabor's descent to that 1,090 feet took only 15 minutes. Like, he was diving down, he was taking his time, but it took him 15 minutes to go down. The ascent itself, when he was like, okay, I've seen this, I'm good, let's go back up, I've broken the record now. Coming back to the surface, it took him 13 hours and 35 minutes. Not only that, but he was assisted by a team of 30 divers, which included technicians as well as medical staff, and had periodic checks along the way up. That's how serious underwater, when you get into the terms of pressure and ascending, the bends and the nitrogen and all of that, that's how serious this is. The members of the Titan sub were at an unknown depth, and the vessel had some sort of technical failure that caused the chamber to depressurize immediately. And they were likely far deeper than Ahmed Gabor's 1,090 feet. They could have been, we don't know yet, but they could have been on the bottom of the ocean 12,000 feet down. And as I said a moment ago, on the Earth's surface at sea level, we walk around at about 1 atmosphere, which is roughly 14 pounds of pressure applied per square inch. We're acclimated. This is our normal environment, right? Assuming that the Titan made it down to the Titanic at 12,000 feet on the very bottom of the ocean, that's about 6,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Using an example I found by a physicist, the adult human male is on average 5'9" and 200 pounds. That's about 3,000 square inches for the human adult male body. So 3,000 square inches at 6,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, that works out to 18 million pounds of instantaneous pressure. And I'm sure from hearing that, your mind went to one place, and we're going to talk about that here in a moment. But that right there, folks, is why what Stockton Rush did, why what he did was so incredibly offensive, neglectful, vile, and probably going to result in some insane numbers of lawsuits. It's terrible. Scientists, adventurers, hell, even base-level scuba divers are aware of the effects of pressure. And currently, we don't know which element of the Titan initially failed. As an example, let's say that ghetto porthole, that 8-inch thick sheet of plexiglass, let's say that for some reason that burst. There were 5 men in that cabin. Assuming they weighed 180 pounds each, that's 900 pounds of human, more or less. Let's just keep it simple. That's 900 pounds of humans. Organs, bones, fat, 900 pounds in that submersible. As soon as the window failed, there was an immediate depressurization of the cabin. inside of the submersible, it was pressurized. That was the entire point. That's what allows them, or humans, James Cameron, when he goes down to the Titanic, they found a way to safely keep the cabin pressurized to allow us to breathe. When that element on the Titan failed, it caused immediate depressurization. So what happens in that instance? And this is what I think most people are curious about. That pressurized air bubble inside of the cabin is compressed instantaneously. And that actually impacts the temperature to about 10,340 degrees Fahrenheit, to be exact, which is the same temperature as the surface of the sun. So in one single millisecond, the submersible itself basically turned in on itself, like the metal and whatnot, pretty much like completely imploded, turned in on itself. The inner chamber was cooked to about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the remains that were, the little bit that was still left over, were basically liquefied. Imagine a hydraulic press coming down on the submersible, like in an just immediate, just split second. There were no real remains in this event. Those 5 men were basically turned to goo and or mist at that point in just a heartbeat. And you might be thinking, holy shit, what a terrible, horrible way to die. And yeah, the thought of it is actually pretty freaking terrible. But the one saving grace, if you want to even call it that, is that not a single one of them probably felt or saw what was happening to them. It takes about 100 milliseconds for your body to transmit pain to your brain. Have you ever cut your finger or stubbed your toe and there's just a slight little bit of delay in processing and pain processing? I mean, sometimes it's negligible, but it's there. It also takes 13 milliseconds for your brain to process visual information. So in short, none of the men felt their deaths. They were quite literally liquefied in an instant. And then whatever was left in the inside of the Titan was pretty much squeezed out like a hydraulic press when the metal started turning on itself. Now, that being said, it is quite possible that they knew that there was a malfunction and that they were going to die in that heinous way. But the fear from that would be pretty terrible. But they definitely 100% likely did not feel or see anything. Their lives were quite literally just snuffed out like candles. And death by depressurization? This isn't even the worst incident of this in world history. It kind of ties it. In 1983, there was a little place called the Byford Dolphin Incident. It took place on a Norwegian oil rig in Scottish waters. 4 saturation divers and 1 crew member were killed in virtually the same way, give or take. If you want to see a deadly job, guys, look into saturation divers. That is some terrifying shit. Like, Deadliest Catch, crab workers, people in the Bering Sea represent. You guys are wonderful. I can't imagine that either. But saturation diving fucking terrifies me. And that's because it's their whole life. Oil rigs will pay divers to dive down between 500 and 1,000 feet to do repair work. Except these divers don't live on the surface. Oil rigs will have quarters down far deep underwater to allow them to live down under the ocean on shifts. They have their own super high pressurized living and working chambers just deep under the ocean. And then they stay there for like a month at a time or however long their shifts is so that they can work. But again, back to the ascent time that I gave you earlier. Can you imagine spending 15 minutes going to work every day, but then then you work your shift or do whatever you need to do, but then it takes you 10 hours to go home? That's obviously not feasible. So these people live underwater, they do their work, and then they do these slow ascent when their shift is over, several weeks or a month later. And they make on average, just so y'all know, if any of you guys are feeling extra sassy and adventurous today, they make between $30,000 and $45,000 a month. And if you ever want me to cover this case in a future episode, let me know. It's incredibly sad, it's gnarly, and basically another example of what rapid depressurization looks like. But more or less, they had an equipment failure, and this happened to them in an elevator shaft that was bringing them back to the surface. And one guy was sucked out of a lock. But again, let me know if you want to cover the Byford Dolphin incident, because it actually has a lot of real world implications because of the trauma of it. It had a great deal of impact on safety regulations surrounding stuff like this. But anyway, the entire Titan scenario has led to a pretty big outcry on social media, especially. I've never seen so many people make memes about someone's misfortune, basically in my whole life. And I'm not going to lie, y'all. I'm not going to lie because, again, I'm not going to see heaven. So why does it matter? I love them. I laughed at almost every single meme between so much crossover from other memes and other funny things that have happened in the last year or so. They made me laugh cry. And I don't necessarily feel like a bad person, but it's really, 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 really hard for me to extend any empathy in this situation to anyone outside of the 19-year-old child and his family in this incident. And again, I may be a horrible person. I don't like to see people suffer, but when people make asinine, informed decisions and it's really hard to share that empathy. So I'm actually going to play two of my favorite TikTok responses to this debacle. The first one comes from a user that goes by the name of Caffeinated Kitty. And I absolutely adore her and I adore her channel. She has a lot of great commentary. I first discovered her on TikTok due to the Covenant school shooting. For many of you who know, I live like 2 miles away from the Covenant school shooting here in Nashville, where a handful of kids were mowed down yet again by an AR-15. And she made a really thoughtful, kind of thought-provoking video on that. And I saw that she also did one for the Titan Submersible, and honestly, I kind of agree. So we're going to go ahead and play her clip now.
So let me just get this straight about the whole Titanic debacle. You have a small gaggle of obscenely rich men participating in tragedy tourism by going down to the Titanic, in which a disproportionate amount of poor people died in the incident due to the greed and classism of the upper class. And these men have now become a macabre spectacle that they themselves were originally oohing and awing. Because now nobody is ever going to talk about anything regarding these five except the awful, viscerally terrifying way that they probably died. It's irony at its peak.
And then the second point is from a user that goes by the name Applied Science, and he actually brings up another great point.
If you see people making jokes about the submarine and it's making you a little upset, I want you to know that you should be upset. You should be upset, but I don't want you to stop there. I don't want you to stop at being upset that there are some folks that are laughing at another human being's despair. I want you now to ask the next question, right? Don't get intellectually lazy now. Ask the next question. What could have possibly happened in these last 100 years to create a condition where millions of working class people have almost no empathy for a billionaire in despair? What could have happened? It can't just be that poor people are just angry and jealous. Like, don't get intellectually lazy now. You ask the question, go all the way, figure the whole thing out. Where could this lack of empathy come from? Could it be that poor and middle class, lower class people see the wealth that their labor creates being profiteered on at near oligarchy levels? So much so that they themselves are paywalled from the very things that their labor is supposed to provide them, like healthcare, like education, like access to education. Their living conditions are being commodified to such an extreme level that they don't even know if they can live in the places that they grew up in. And all of this is happening at the hands of millionaires and billionaires that are taking too much from what they're not creating. Could it be that? We literally just went through a global pandemic and watched millionaires and billionaires on corporate earning calls brag about raising the prices of basic goods to rake in record profits when we needed them the most. You're seeing these jokes online and you think that people are not nice, but the truth is people are not dumb. Large corporation CEOs and billionaires fight tooth and nail. They hire lobbyists after lawyer after politician to make sure that the minimum wage stays exactly where it is as these large corporations grow exponentially in size based off of the labor of the people that they refuse to pay a living wage. You are never going to find empathy out of those people.
Both TikTokers brought up the issue of the obscene amount of wealth that it took to even make this trip possible. So let's just break this down really quick, right? Like, let's translate this to real talk. Let's say that you make $50,000 a year for a salary. You go to Starbucks every morning and you get a $7 iced coffee. That iced coffee is 0.014% of your income, okay? 0.014% of your income at $50,000 a year would be, say, a Starbucks iced coffee. Now, what would the equivalent be for a billionaire? 0.014% of $1 billion is $140,000. That means that for the men who paid for trips on the Titan, It basically was them buying an iced coffee and a croissant. That's the equivalence there. The man who brought his son and paid $500,000, to him, that was like buying 3 iced coffees for his family. It would take me 3.12 years at my day job to buy a ticket to go on the Titan. I'm all for people spending their money however they see fit, and I really kind of understand, especially Applied Science, the TikToker Applied Science, his view of this. When the everyday people have gone through so much, we've just gone through a pandemic. We're at a point in society right now, especially right now, where people are fed the fuck up. When CEOs are making $1.5 million an hour and the average hourly wage for people nationwide is $33 an hour, I mean, come the fuck on. Mount Everest itself used to be an experience. It used to be something to brag about. Now it's basically just a tourist destination for the ultra rich who they hire a bunch of Sherpas to carry all of their shit. They set up camp and then they get to pretend that they did it all themselves in photo ops and social media and that they're just badass Sir Edmund Hillarys. And I think the piece that what I find most shocking about all of this is that OceanGate was negligent and they willingly put other people's lives at risk. And Stockton Rush did that. He went against all of it. He did out of the box design. He cut corners. He ignored all the warnings. He refused to get safety certified. And at the end of the day, he bolted himself into that vessel and went down to the bottom of the ocean anyway. And I'm sorry, y'all, it's funny. That is just the epitome of ridiculousness. And these are the type of people who say that they are forefathers of like invention and all of this kind of shit. When they're cutting the red tape, they are actively for removing safety regulations so that they can do whatever they want to do. Now, I may not personally understand the love for the Titanic and wanting to go see a graveyard where thousands of people died a century ago for just a couple minutes. Like, I don't understand that. But what is really kind of gross to me especially is that not only did these men spend ungodly amounts of money to go on this ill-fated trip, but now because of all of this shit, the Coast Guard, the military, Canadian taxpayers, American taxpayers, who's funding the endeavor? Because they're still researching this. There's still an active investigation on this. If this happened to you, me, or friends or family, no one would give a shit. Our little vessel would explode. People would be like, oh my God, so sad. And that would be it. But instead, we're getting millions and millions and millions of dollars in investigations here, probably obviously for lawsuits and, additional purposes and things like that. But I think the absolute idiocy of this entire endeavor, considering knowing that it was a shitty ship, a shitty submersible, it's just, I'm sorry, I find that to be open, fair game. It's kind of like that missionary who went to North Sentinel Island and everyone was like, bro, they will kill you. They will kill you. They will kill you. And the missionary was like, no, I believe in God. I'm sharing the message with God. He didn't even get on the island itself and he was killed. But to those people who've been really upset at seeing, all of the laughs and the memes and all of that, like, I get it. It's not human nature to want to just like shit and make fun of death. But don't forget, also last week, there was that full ship of refugees that capsized in the Mediterranean, killed hundreds of women and children primarily. No one really gave a shit. There was a German captain of a nearby vessel who actually tried to save as many as she could. She's now facing 20 years in prison in Italy for aiding illegal immigration. She's actually facing 20 years in prison for trying to pull drowning children and babies out of the water. And this entire situation is barely even getting comparable news coverage in comparison to a shitty rich white man who ignored all safety protocols and knowingly took people down in a janky submersible. And then the one other point that I wanted to really quickly bring up is death tourism. Death tourism is the practice of more or less traveling to sites associated with tragedy, disaster, or big historical events involving death. And, I live in the South here. We have a lot of Civil War battlefields, relatively close to me. People go to that. They go to Gettysburg. They do stuff like that with historical context. Proponents say that death tourism provides educational and historical context and allows us to learn from the past. Others say it's exploitative and disrespectful to those who died. What you may not see in the videos related to the Titan and Titanic coverage is that the ocean is an absolute trash heap in the area around where the Titanic was sunk. I mean, have you ever seen the videos from the base camp at Mount Everest, like one of them and the main one? It borderline looks like a fucking landfill because so many people are leaving their trash behind or the wind's blowing it around naturally. It's the same with the ocean near the Titanic. I mean, there's mounds of floating trash, cans, plastic. One captain who was doing a 2020 interview on the ocean tours in that area said, quote, beer cans, plastic cups, that sort of thing. They're everywhere. We even found a detergent box lying under the ocean in the middle of the wreck. That garbage is going to be around for a very long time. And y'all, as humans, we ruin everything. Do you remember when the world was on lockdowns, like shortly, a couple months into the pandemic, when everybody was under a lockdown and Italy and Venice and the canals and stuff, there were dolphins. Nature actually started taking back the world. And then, of course, lockdowns were lifted because, hey, we kind of have to work and meander and go about our lives, and we destroyed shit again. I personally don't believe that visiting the site of a mass casualty event from, say, 1912 is inherently disrespectful to the survivors. I mean, that's kind of a long time ago. But the sheer traffic to the site is causing problems, and the fact of the matter is that humans, we're not respectful. And then we also have to take into consideration the other types of death tourism, like serial killer tours. There's the Jeffrey Dahmer walking tour in Milwaukee. Same thing with Zodiac. Basically, same thing with most of them. You can find a death tour. You can walk into the Lizzie Borden house outside of Boston and see where she whacked people to death with an axe. The question that I have for you all from this episode, and what I want to know is what you think about death tourism as a whole. Do you find it disrespectful and exploitative? Or do you think that morbid curiosity is fine? It's kind of human nature for the most part, and it makes sense for people to capitalize on tragic events, regardless of when they occurred? At what year does that kind of, how much time has to pass in order for that to be okay? But this is it for today, guys. Thank you for listening. It's just been a really fascinating kind of social observation with all of this. And I have some people on my social media saying, oh my God, the people who are laughing at this are horrible people and I can't be associated with them. This is nothing to laugh at. Then you have the rest that are sharing memes like rabid monkeys. And then the news that's come out about Stockton Rush, the CEO, and the shitty deals and how much he just did not care for safety regulations. It's just been, the 19-year-old kid that shouldn't have been there. That's the ultimate tragedy. And then you have the stepson of one of the billionaires out there hitting on OnlyFans and going to a Blink-182 concert. I mean, this kind of was like the perfect storm on social media in the meme world for something like that to happen. And it's been fascinating. I want to know what you think. Head over to Instagram and comment on the post for this show. And that's it for today, guys. Until next crime.